Good morning and welcome to our viewers around the world. I am Hussain, Director for South and Central Asia here at the Hudson Institute. Almost 2 decades after American-led coalition forces went into Afghanistan to eliminate Al-Qaeda's sanctuary provided by the brutal Taliban regime, and 1 year after the United States signed a peace agreement with the Afghan Taliban, and 2 months into the Biden administration, we want to have a discussion on where things stand in relation to Afghanistan. The Biden administration has slowed down the American rush to the exit in Afghanistan, and the State Department says all options remain on the table regarding the withdrawal of American troops, and that they have not made any final decision about America's force posture in Afghanistan. At the same time, it remains a reality that most people in the United States want this long engagement of the military engagement of the United States to come to an end. In early March, in a letter to President Ashraf Ghani, Secretary of State Tony Blinken proposed a UN-led peace conference in Turkey aimed at forming an inclusive Afghan government. This conference is supposed to complement a separate meeting among envoys from the US, China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, and India to discuss a unified approach to supporting peace in Afghanistan. The Taliban have not kept their end of the bargain so far. There has been no reduction in violence from their side in Afghanistan since their agreement with the United States. And there are those who think that the agreement was a mistake. Instead, the US should talk more to the government in Kabul. Today, we are fortunate to have with us today His Excellency Hamdullah, the National Security Advisor to the President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan since 2018. Dr. Mohib was Afghanistan's ambassador to the United States from 2015 to 2018. And before that, he served as Deputy Chief of Staff to the President of Afghanistan. He belongs to a younger generation of Afghanistans, and he understands their sentiment. These are young people who either saw the brutality or know of the brutality of the Taliban when they controlled Afghanistan before 9/11 and do not want it to be repeated. And many of them are also critical of the policy that has led to a longer engagement of the United States than might have been necessary, and the idea of a hurried exit. So, Ambassador Mohib, I would like you to make some opening remarks, and then we can start having a discussion. What is the road to peace in Afghanistan in the view of the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan?
Thank you, Ambassador Hussain Haqqani, for your opening and introduction. I would also like to take this moment to say hello to friends, Afghan compatriots and colleagues from my time in DC. This is a very timely event to discuss some very important issues and matters that are currently in the headlines. And I thank you, Ambassador, and the Hudson Institute South and Central Asia program for this opportunity. The Afghan government has been at the center of peace efforts for the past few years, and we have had some very important milestones to that effect. The Peace Law Jarga of April 2019, in which a broad section of Afghan society came together from across the country to deliberate on what questions of peace are and answer them, and that resulted in the green light to proceed with negotiations with the Taliban. This was an important occasion where the government's mandate to engage in talks was formally endorsed by the nation. Accordingly, we took bold steps in this direction. Fast forward to 2020, after the US Taliban deal was announced and the Afghan government had to make tough decisions to release the hardened Taliban convicts, we organized another peace law jarga in August 2020. On this occasion as well, the 4,000 Afghan representatives from across the country deliberated for 3 days and offered an olive branch to the Taliban, agreeing with the release of their convicts in exchange for the freedom of Afghan national defense and security forces held hostage by the Taliban. The Afghan negotiating team, a diverse and empowered group of individuals, men and women, and members of the minority, have engaged the Taliban with consistency and urgency to make real progress on issues of substance that affect the Afghan people directly, such as a ceasefire, issues of humanitarian access, the end of targeted terrorism against members of the media and civil society. The Taliban, whose cohort was touted initially as empowered to make important decisions on peace, this is the Doha cohort, have turned out to be underwhelming, both in their willingness to make tough calls, but also in the seriousness of their engagement. They have demurred, evaded, dragged their feet, and even avoided substantive engagement. We saw the most egregious example of this in January this year. The two negotiating teams ended round one and decided to reconvene on January 5 after a break. But while our team made it to Doha at the appointed date to start the talks, the Taliban were nowhere to be seen. For a few days, literally nobody had any idea of their whereabouts. 15 members of the Taliban on the UN sanction list went AWOL. It turns out they were taking tours of Taliban suicide academies in Pakistan and visiting their injured fighters in Karachi. Then they flew to Moscow and Tehran. In this way, they used the privilege of UN Security Council travel exemptions to avoid negotiations and maintain secret rendezvous with their terrorist cohorts across the Durand Line. And when the group returned to Doha 20 days later, they were singing a different tune. Instead of talking about peace, they were talking preconditions to negotiations, something in the air in Quetta and Karachi that I guess changes your thinking. All of this, of course, happened as the Taliban's terrorist outfits were prosecuting an all-out war against Afghan state and society, targeted terrorism against activists, journalists, judges, prosecutors, and civilians. Under this circumstance, the Afghan government is very clear in its positions. One, we're pursuing all possible avenues to get to dignified and lasting peace. We will not be the first to pull out of negotiations. The judgment of history and the need of the hour would not support that. But we're also meeting Taliban's terrorism with tough-minded pragmatism on the battlefield. We're not turning the other cheek. On the international level, we're using all options on the table, including pushing for a review of the UN travel exemptions to prevent abuse and misuse, and proposing for listing key Taliban members who have planned, directed, and executed the escalation of their terrorism. The government of Afghanistan is also actively pursuing a regional approach to bring about consensus among our neighbors and regional actors around the common denominator of counter-terrorism and counter-narcotics, which are shared threats. We are also pursuing aggressive regional connectivity in energy transit projects, using Afghanistan's status as a land bridge between South and Central Asia to build on common denominators and appeal to the self-interest of our neighbors. Not only that, we're also going further afield, traversing the Lapis Lazuli route to get to the Caspian Sea and European markets. President Ghani's policy of multi-alignment, whereby we enhance our alignment of interests with all our regional and global partners, but avoid becoming a party to their disagreements and disputes, is the guiding principle of our foreign and national security policy. Mutual respect and interest and trust will enable us to achieve the end state of a sovereign, united, peaceful, and democratic Afghanistan, capable of expanding the gains of the past 19 years. This end state articulated by President Ghani, is also supported by our key partners and allies, including our foundational partner, the United States, allies in NATO, and partners in the EU. As announced by my office and the White House after my call with NSA Sullivan on January 22nd, Afghanistan maintains close ongoing dialogue and consultation across various levels with the United States, involving both NSCs and other channels, including with Ambassador Khalilzad. We welcome the restoration of the traditional channels of bilateral relations, and through these consultations, we are actively feeding into the ongoing US political review. As part of these consultations, the government has shared several key policy documents that share our view on various important aspects of our bilateral relationship, including peace and counterterrorism. With respect to high-level diplomatic initiatives such as the event in Turkey, the government is of the opinion that we will remain open to any initiative that could take us closer to the goal of a dignified peace in a democratic, unified Afghanistan capable of preserving our gains of the past 20 years, including women's rights and the rights of minorities. Thank you, Ambassador, again for your time.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your time. Let me just begin by asking a question that everyone in Washington is asking. Is the Afghan government prepared for some kind of power sharing with the Taliban as the price for peace? And if so, on what conditions?
Well, let me say that we are willing to make any sacrifices that are required for a durable peace in Afghanistan. Starting with power sharing. But is power sharing our real problem? We find a lot of disagreements with the Taliban on multiple issues. As our negotiating team in Doha has found out, that we have differences of opinion on foreign policy, on domestic policy, on the rights of women, on the rights of minorities. We have differences of opinion on how we treat our neighbors and you know what they would be allowed to do in the relationship and the partnerships that need to be held. So I think that if power sharing is the only issue that we have to discuss, it is the easiest to get through because you know it's structural. We can get down to easy division of responsibilities, or perhaps power, and if that's all. But this is a very elitist way of looking at the problem. It doesn't solve what the Afghan people want, and that is a stable Afghanistan with a government and a system that answers to their demands and their needs. And for that, we must have a rigorous and substantive negotiation with the Taliban on first defining how we're going to view our policies, domestic and foreign, and how our people will see our systems in the future, and then get down to the power sharing part, which I think is the easiest part that we would have to deal with.
So are you saying that the Taliban have so far shown no flexibility in their ideological and philosophical outlook, and they still have the same views that they used to have with some modifications, and that is what is actually holding up the talks?
Absolutely. I think our negotiating team that has been engaging with the Taliban reports back to us that they don't see any change in Taliban from the time they were the little stunt that they had during their regime. So we are yet to see the change in Taliban's posture, in Taliban's opinions, in Taliban's policies that we all hoped would come, because there was a lot of buzz around a changed Taliban. We don't know what that changed Taliban looks like yet, because we haven't seen a change.
There has been a lot of criticism of President Ghani for not being inclusive, not about the Taliban, but about non-Taliban political leaders of Afghanistan. And some of that criticism is spilling over into the American media. There was an article very recently in Newsweek which suggested by a former aide to former President Karzai that suggested that President Ghani was somehow the obstruction. How do you explain that, and what is your response to those criticisms?
Well, our government, as you know, was formed after the elections last year, and post that election, we had serious discussions and negotiations with the main opposition leader, Dr. Abdullah, who is now the head of the High Council for National Reconciliation. And as a result, we had a power sharing, kind of an agreement, and 50% of the cabinet seats went to Dr. Abdullah's allies. And they're currently in their places. The cabinet is split 50-50. And Dr. Abdullah leads the main efforts on peace, and that council includes everybody, including government members that sit in that council to discuss the future of our country. I think we have been the most consultative we can possibly be. President Ghani consults all the leaders when there is a major event. But the responsibility of day-to-day activity of the government is the responsibility of the government. Right? That's what people voted President Ghani into office, and that's why we're sitting here doing what we have to do late into the nights, is to deliver on those activities. And this is a responsibility. I think some members perceive inclusivity as giving them share in the responsibility of the governance, which is not feasible. Are they engaged and have they been consulted on major issues? Absolutely. We think that that's not only an important thing to do, it's necessary to ensure lasting peace in Afghanistan. We want to make sure that all opinions are considered when we make decisions, because in the end, history will remember us by the decisions we make, and those decisions need to be reflective of all walks of life. And sometimes that means we have to make some tough decisions and include other people that perhaps are not all on the same page in the Afghan opposition. This is a republic as anywhere else. We have lots of different voices, and sometimes giving space to one voice also can bring us criticism from others who oppose it.
So basically, you're saying that Afghanistan's friends and those concerned about security in Afghanistan should not be too concerned about this elite sniping in Kabul, and that's just par for the course in terms of how political manipulation and machination takes place.
Well, I think sometimes we feel that the expectation of the international community on our friends from Afghanistan is contradictory. On the one end, they want us to be democratic, and hence we spend so much time on elections, policies, the parliament, and other the normal procedures and normal way of business for a republic to do. And then at the other extent, they expect us to act like a dictatorship, where we can dictate to people more on how and what they should act. The reality is that if we are a democracy, there ought to be different voices, there ought to be criticisms, but does it mean that criticism is right? Every criticism is not worth the same. We have to evaluate what we are hearing and understand that where it's coming from and how factual that criticism is. We unfortunately have a very active political society, and there is nothing else for them to do. In the United States, you have these think tanks where former politicians can join and be part of the dialogue. In Afghanistan, that doesn't exist. The only way to remain active and of value is if you are seen as an opposition, and so you must create criticism sometime, even if it's not factual.
Okay. You spoke about the Republic several times. The Taliban say that the Republic is not acceptable to them, that they want the recreation of the Islamic Emirate. In fact, there have been some statements saying that the legitimate ruler of Afghanistan is the Taliban Emir, and therefore all that is to be negotiated is the withdrawal of foreign troops. Is that a more fundamental issue than people sometimes understand and talk about in relation to Afghanistan and the peace process in the US?
I'll take that in two parts, that question. One, a leader must be among its people and must be seen. No one has seen Taliban leaders, not just the emir that they claim, but even lower level officials have not been seen by the Afghan people. They don't know what they look like. They don't know where they live. Well, they do know where they live, but in hindsight. They don't know what their financial situation is, how they live, what are their values. All they know them through is names and violence. And that cannot be called legitimate leadership by any means as a people. And then when it comes back to the Republic's question, this is not something we're just proposing because we are here in a government. This is not a government position. Again, this is the position that the people voted for and want to see. People fear Taliban. They don't want the Taliban's rule. They fear that. They want to see their interests reflected in the government, and they want their voices being heard. So the Republic provides an opportunity for all groups to come together. Taliban is not the only group in Afghanistan, not the only reality of this country. It is a reality, but a part of it. The government or the Republic represents Jumbish Islami, Jamiat Islami, Hizb Islami, and then it will have a place for Taliban, but it also represents other democratic groups and parties, civil society, media, and all of that has a space in the Republic for. The reason we insist on the Republic is because it can represent or provide opportunity for all of these groups to peacefully converge and create a system that is answerable to the Afghan people. The Taliban's emirate is not accommodating or cannot accommodate all these other interest groups that are in Afghanistan. And they're by no means smaller than the Taliban. If their interests were not represented in the state, again, they could become an insurgency like the Taliban became when they were not represented in the government and they were not included at Bonn. So when we say that we want a republic, we say it because we think that this is the only way to reach a stable and peaceful Afghanistan, which will not have reasons inside the country for another war. We want the war to come to an end. We want this killing and this suffering to come to an end. And in that, to do that, compromises must be made on all sides. And that compromise can be made in a republic.
So the Taliban say that they have an approach that they call talking and fighting, meaning that they will continue to talk, but they will also continue to fight. That basically means that they can continue to attack, which they have been doing. How prepared is the Afghan government to do it? And what is the critical contribution of the United States in that fighting? So if the United States pulls out, how are you positioned to continue the fight? Because that's the reason why Ambassador Khalilzad says there has to be a deal before America withdraws. And there are several people who think that that deal is not necessary because, after all, when the Soviets withdrew, they did not have a deal about the future of the government in Kabul, and the government that they had supported in Afghanistan, the Najibullah government, lasted for almost 4 years after the Soviet withdrawal, and it fell only because the Soviet Union collapsed. So explain to us the ground situation on the Afghan government's capabilities in being able to keep the Taliban away. If there is no conclusion to peace talks in time for an American withdrawal.
Well, last year, Secretary Pompeo tweeted as one of the achievements of the United States that no American soldiers had been harmed since the February deal with the Taliban. And that speaks to how speaks to the capabilities of the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces. We have been engaged in that fight since the war has not stopped. In fact, Taliban increased their activity. This winter was the bloodiest of all. In previous years, the level of violence and the level of casualties had been lower than this year's winter. They changed their tactic to targeted killings and roadside bombs instead of using truck bombs and suicide attacks in the cities, but they continued their violence all throughout the country in all walks of life. We have been responding to that. The ANDSF has been the core has had the core responsibility for this, and the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. They have been solely responsible for all this protection and operations. We do seek help from the United States, and this was reflected in their agreement with the Taliban. When we are under attack, we still rely on some of the air power the United States has in Afghanistan. We rely on some of their ISR capabilities, which we're still developing. So I think for our partners who may be concerned about the capabilities of ANDSF, I want to assure them that you should be proud of helping us rebuild our national defense and security forces. They're extremely capable. They're volunteer-based. No one has been forced to come to join the army. Yet they do, and they continue to defend their state that they believe in, their country that they believe in, and their values that they believe in. And they are a capable force with all that violence raging. When we had close to 150,000 foreign troops in our country, and all of that burden was shifted to the Afghan security forces. And yet we're able to keep our momentum, means that there is something in place. I'm confident that the Afghan security forces can hold on their own. I have said this before, that our problem is not in capability anymore, it's not a kinetic problem. It is a financial problem. What needs to be ensured is that we can sustain the ANDSF. Now, can the Afghan government do that at current standard? No. With our own resources, we cannot. We will require some technical help, and we will require some financial support for some time to see. And that's what we are proposing to the administration, to the new administration, to support the Afghan security forces, to find a way to support the Afghan security forces for a longer period financially, and then we can work on other issues on the side. This will also improve our prospects for peace, because for as long as the Taliban and their sponsors believe that the US withdrawal will result in the collapse of the Afghan government, they will continue this policy that they currently have. They will have a hard line, and they will not negotiate in earnest. But as soon as they realize that this is a long-term commitment, they will not be able to inspire their fighters. Even now, the Taliban are having trouble. The fighting that went in Helmand and Kandahar had revealed some of the weaknesses of the Taliban. First, Taliban sent fighters from Helmand throughout Afghanistan wherever they needed. So when they attacked Helmand, they believed that they would have enough forces there. Unfortunately, they didn't. Many Taliban don't believe in this war anymore. They believe that after the agreement with the United States, there is no legitimacy for this conflict. The international body of ulama has come and issued statements throughout, except for one country. All other countries, including Qatar, India, Indonesia, many ulamas have come forward, and Kuwait, they have all come forward and said that there is no legitimacy for this conflict. So the Taliban rank and file have been affected by this. So they had to bring fighters from Farah to Helmand to fight, and also to Kandahar. Of course, fighters in Farah were not used to the territory, so they took a lot of casualties and were not happy about this. They also brought fighters from Zabul who were not happy about this and returned. We are seeing a weakening Taliban rank and file as a result of this deal. The legitimacy is gone. And also the ANDSF continues to show its strength despite this increased level of violence against them, and with little support beyond. We think that this capability that is a joint asset of the Afghan government and our international partners, chief in that with the United States, has the capability to defend Afghanistan against an insurgency, against terrorism, and counter narcotics, and do counter narcotics should it have continued financial support.
So do we have a number in mind? For example, for those people in America who say, hey, 19 years is long enough, we spent blood and treasure in Afghanistan. What you're proposing is that we no longer need the Americans to spend their blood. There's already a very small American force compared to 150,000 that was there at one time. This is just a minuscule number. That too can be phased out without difficulty, as long as there is a financial commitment. What kind of financial commitment are we talking about? It would obviously be relatively cost effective for the US to pay for the ANDSF without having to take casualties for the American side, and make sure that the Taliban never come back into power with the kind of brutality that they had before. Why has that not moved forward so far, that proposal?
The US policymakers have two questions or two sets of problems that they need to address. One is the number of troops in Afghanistan that are involved in combat. We're not talking about troop numbers who are stationed here for other purposes or protection of embassy, any future planning of disasters, prevention of disasters, but those who are engaged in violence or in combat in Afghanistan. That's one question, to reduce that number so they no longer need combat troops here. I will also caution against the not confusing that with train and assist, because we do have trainers and assist that not always is active military. Sometimes they're contractors, but we do have that. And it's not just Afghanistan. Every country has foreign train and advise and assist capabilities in their military forces. And the second is on the huge numbers of money spent in the country, again, in defending Afghanistan. And they have a set of a challenge of counter-terrorism and counter-narcotics. Now, if they withdraw these troops who are not involved in combat, then what happens to counter-terrorism? And what happens if the space is then available to this narco trade militia that once ruled in the 1990s? What do we do about this? We propose that the United States and other NATO partners channel the support it currently gives to Afghanistan through ANDSF, in special forms of the ANDSF, which is about $5 billion in total, 4 coming from the United States and $1 billion coming from our other NATO partners. And we will use those resources to do those 3 things: counter terrorism, counter narcotics, and counterinsurgency. It will solve both of those problems for the US. They will not have to maintain combat troops. I must state that combat troops is important and emphasize on that. And they will not have to spend an unknown amount of money defending or fighting terrorism in this region. Any other expenses they might have, where for maintaining any level of troops would be dependent on what U.S. policy is.
So basically, you're saying that that excessive focus on troop withdrawal that began with the U.S. process of negotiations with the Taliban is actually not as important for the future of Afghanistan. What is more important is determining what kind of government Afghanistan will have. You are open to having the Taliban join the government, but as one of the players, as long as they agree to the greater rules that, the views of the majority will prevail and that they cannot force their version of Islam down the throats of all Afghans. And that will be the basis of negotiation, that the US needs to talk to you about what kind of security support they can give to the Afghan National Defense Forces so that they can phase out their own combat troops out of Afghanistan.
Absolutely. In preparation for this, what we have done is we have brought all our special forces in the army, in the police, and at the NDS together under one command. Now, these are forces that have been trained by the best, by Americans and NATO troops. They have different capabilities, but they are prepared for this terrain, and they currently do almost 97% of the offensive operations in Afghanistan. They have been effective against Daesh, they've been effective against Al-Qaeda, and they've been effective against Taliban. They're also
Daesh is ISIS, right?
Sorry?
Daesh is ISIS for the
Correct.
for the American viewers.
What you would call ISIS-K. They've been effective against all of those, and these are the most transparent institutions in the Afghan system. They were built from ground up by U.S. and NATO allies, and they've been trained by them. There is no question of any kind of corruption or ghost numbers among them. They are dedicated to the war, to the fight that they're involved in right now, and they believe in the core values of defending their territory and their people against terrorism. And they're very capable, and the US know these leaders and these forces very well.
Now, what do you say to those who say that is all a recipe for forever war? That, as long as the Taliban are able to recruit and they are able to have their insurgents and you are able to have some financial support that keeps your forces able to fight them, that there will be a war forever. And to avoid that, maybe a lot more concessions need to be made to the Taliban. What do you say to them?
Well, if we're not prepared for war, we cannot make peace. The Taliban will only use this opportunity that is afforded to them for peace to drag this process along and to wait out the withdrawal of foreign troops before they can impose their rule on the Afghan people, which I know will not be acceptable to the American people and all our other partners. And they would have to make a return, because I know the conscience of our allies will not be able to tolerate Taliban rule in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, it also means that the conflict will not end. People will not surrender to the Taliban. People cannot surrender to the Taliban. And, it's one thing to accept them as a reality and bring them into the fold of the governance space. It's another to live under their tyranny.
So basically, accept the people who have become Taliban, but not accept the ideas that the Taliban bring for the future of Afghanistan.
There will be space in the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan for the Taliban's values, their beliefs, as any other party would have. But the rule or the system here would have to tolerate their opposition as well.
And they can, of course, convince a majority of the people to vote for them or support them and then change the rules accordingly if they can have the support of the majority. Is that the idea that you are espousing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Taliban need to be responsible to the Afghan people both ways. This is not a broadcast system. The Taliban currently broadcast what they do, and they want people to take that as their word. They say they're fighting against an invasion when there isn't one. They say they're fighting against foreign occupation when there isn't one. They say they want to bring a just system, but you would find from open source research that the Taliban system is one of the most corrupt systems that is founded on illegal mining, illegal logging, the illegal taxations, and also on narcotics. Now, how can someone call or a group call itself just when that is the base of its finances and its leaders are known to be major narco traders?
And of course, they have been among their demands in the process, for example, in return for the release of a hostage, an American hostage that they have in return, and while demanding release of more prisoners, they have often demanded the release of major narcotics figures that are arrested and in prison in the United States.
Absolutely. Now, the Taliban make a lot of claims, but they are not open to the scrutiny of the public. And the last 20 years, Afghanistan has built a very open society. These people are used to responsiveness from their leaders and their government and their system, and they openly criticize perhaps some of the most critical media outlets in Afghanistan, who question everything and are used to this and take this as a norm. I think the Taliban are underestimating what kind of a public in Afghanistan they will face. Again, I will repeat what I said earlier. They're feared. They're not respected. They're not loved. They're not liked even. They're feared.
Okay, so have they broken from Al-Qaeda? Because that was one of the promises they made in the Doha Agreement, and there was a UN report that said that they haven't. What's the state of play on that question?
Again, there is independent reporting on that, the outside of Afghan sources, Afghanistan government sources that verify that the Taliban have not broken with Al-Qaeda. In fact, our position is that they cannot break with Al-Qaeda. They're so ingrained into the Taliban system that they will not be able to do so. And if they do open, what kind of an emirate would it be? The Taliban, an emir cannot be an emir of just the Afghan people. An emir of what they call an emir al-Mu'mineen would be the emir of all faithfuls. Now, if it's restricted to a geography, it cannot be an emir and there can't be an emirate. So it goes against the fundamentals of the Taliban regime.
It's important to remember that the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden had sworn an oath of loyalty to the Taliban leader at the time, Mullah Omar. And what you have said so far suggests that the Taliban, at least in their ideas and beliefs, haven't changed, even though their tactics have changed after moving to Doha and wanting to talk. So based on what you've shared with us, I see that there are two or three suggestions coming from you. One is that the US negotiate with the Afghan government about a longer term commitment for the Afghan National Defense Forces, and that once that is there, the US will no longer need to have combat forces in Afghanistan. The second thing I hear from you is that the Taliban are welcome to be part of the Afghan Republican government and have a share, but they are not. They cannot and will not be allowed to impose their views and beliefs on the entire country. And the third, that you want to continue to engage talking to them and go through all the processes that have been put in place. Is it realistic that any of these processes will work out given the earlier two conditions?
Well, we are not dealing with hypotheticals. This is the fate of 34 million people in a large country in a very critical part of the world. There is no option but to reach for what is real and what will work to bring stability to this country that has seen enough suffering.
So, in a nutshell, what do you think American policy towards Afghanistan should be that works towards peace, but also towards disengagement of a military nature for the United States?
Afghanistan is in a different place than it was in 2001. The American people helped Afghanistan rebuild our country, rebuild our institutions. Now, does it mean that some of those institutions need reforms? Absolutely. And does it mean that we need to improve some of our services? Absolutely. But we have been fixing the system while fighting a war. It needs to be understood that the commitment from the Afghan people is towards a democratic Afghanistan that wants to be an ally to our partners who have helped us build this, and we want to build on those gains as we go forward and utilize the potential that has been created. We think that this is an opportune moment for peace. There is an opportunity for the Taliban to take. It's also an opportunity for Pakistan to utilize, to normalize relations, and we're pursuing all those avenues. I think it's important that we remain ambitious on the political front with the negotiations, but also to be realistic and have our plan B's and C's ready. We cannot put all our eggs in one basket and then cry over it when it fails, if it fails. So we have to have our backups to even give our plan A more of a chance to succeed.
Any final thoughts that you would like to share with our viewers today?
Well, I think Afghanistan has remained in the thoughts and prayers of the American people. I have seen it firsthand during my tenure as ambassador in the United States. I know what the American people aspire to, and I know their frustrations as well. What I would like them to know is that the Afghanistan today is a very different place than what they saw and what the introduction of our country was to them. The capabilities they have helped us build are going to help us maintain a stable Afghanistan for a very long time to come. They have a partner in this region, a strong partner in this region, and will continue to be. We look forward to a shared future, a peaceful future, a prosperous future together. I am confident in the capabilities of the Afghan defense and security forces. I think with this dialogue that we have begun with our partners in the U.S. government, we will be able to create an environment that will bring that long-term stability to Afghanistan. Sometimes it might seem slow and frustrating, but this is a path that we must take, and we must test all avenues for peace in Afghanistan.
Well, it seems that the Afghan National Security Advisor, Hamdullah, seems ready to talk and fight at the same time. And Afghanistan, he says, is prepared to do that. It needs economic and assistance and long-term commitment from the United States, but may not need combat troops forever. So that may be something for a lot of people to think about here in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohib. Thank you to the audience for watching us. From Hudson Institute, this is Hussain Haqqani saying goodbye.
Thank you, Ambassador Haqqani.